wow, congratulations on landing that first leadership role. That's huge. I bet you're feeling a mix of excitement and maybe a little bit of like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into?
I can only imagine.
Yeah, it can feel a little like stepping onto a whole new planet when you're starting out as a leader. So that's why today we are diving into the Unfolding Leader podcast.
Great choice.
Yeah, it's packed with advice for new leaders, and we're going to be distilling all that expert advice to help you kind of navigate this new world. Think of this as your leadership cheat sheet, pulled straight from the source.
It's like having a seasoned explorer hand you a compass and a map
Hmm.
right when you're about to head into like uncharted territory.
Exactly. Okay, so let's start unpacking this map. One of the things that the podcast really emphasized was the importance of finding your leadership style early on. And they talked about how there's no one-size-fits-all approach. They even mentioned like Daniel Goleman's 6 leadership styles. Have you heard those?
Oh, absolutely. Goldman's work is foundational in leadership development. His 6 styles, visionary, coaching, affiliative, democratic, pace-setting, and commanding, offer a framework for understanding the different ways leaders can approach their roles.
Yeah, and I feel like just hearing all those different styles, it can be kind of overwhelming at first, right?
It can be, yeah, especially when you're starting out. But what's really interesting is that Goldman himself actually cautions new leaders about falling into the trap of that commanding style.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, it might seem like the most natural way to kind of assert your authority when you're new to a leadership position, but it can really backfire,
Yeah.
especially if you're leading a team of people who already have experience.
Yeah, I can see how that would cause some friction. Like, if people feel like they're being micromanaged or not trusted to do their jobs, they're probably going to resent that.
Exactly. And that's where I think understanding your own tendencies and your own strengths as a leader really comes into play. Like, let's say, you're someone who naturally gravitates towards a more collaborative approach. That could be like a real superpower for you as a new leader. It can help you build trust and rapport quickly with your team.
So it's not just about knowing like the textbook definitions of the different leadership styles. It's about figuring out which one really aligns with who you are, authentically as a leader. I guess it would be tempting though, wouldn't it, to just try to like mimic a leader that you admire?
Oh, for sure. It's so tempting. But ultimately, authenticity is key. You trying to be someone you're not will only create this kind of dissonance and erode trust with your team. And the podcast hosts really stressed this point. They actually shared an example of this one leader who tried to adopt a highly charismatic style, even though it didn't really feel natural to him.
Hmm.
And it ended up creating this disconnect with his team, who saw right through the facade.
Yeah, that's a good lesson to learn early on. So it sounds like once you have at least some sense of your own leadership style, the next big thing is building credibility with your team.
Absolutely. That's crucial. You've got to establish that trust and respect from day one. And it's not just about, being competent in your role. It's also about consistently showing up, being reliable, and communicating openly with your team.
Okay, so all of those sound like pretty straightforward principles, but how do you actually put those into action? Like the podcast mentioned one-on-one meetings as a key strategy for building credibility. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, one-on-ones are so incredibly valuable, especially when you're new to a leadership role. They give you that dedicated space to really connect with each team member individually. You can understand their goals, their challenges, and start building those, super important relationships. The podcast actually shared this anecdote about a leader who inherited a team that was totally demoralized. The previous manager had been very hands-off and distant. So this new leader started scheduling these regular one-on-ones with each team member, really just to listen, just to understand their perspectives.
It makes me wonder, like, how much did the team appreciate those one-on-ones, especially after having a manager who was so distant?
It totally shifted the dynamic. People started to feel valued and heard, and that led to a huge boost in their motivation and their productivity. But the key was consistency. He didn't just do a few one-on-ones and then stop. He made it a regular part of his leadership routine.
I can see how that would build trust and show that you're really invested in your team. So it's not just about saying, hey, my door's always open. It's about actually scheduling that time and making it a priority. But, I think there's another aspect of leadership that can feel really daunting, especially at the beginning, and that's embracing the learning curve.
Absolutely. I mean, you're stepping into this new role. You're probably feeling a bit overwhelmed. It's so tempting to try to project this image of, I've got it all figured out.
Right.
But the podcast guests were really adamant about the importance of being open about the fact that you're learning and growing. They even shared a story about this CEO who, like on his first day, told his team, I don't have all the answers, and I'm going to need your help to navigate this.
Wow, that's such a refreshing approach.
Yeah,
I can only imagine how much that probably helped him build trust with his team right away. It makes him seem so much more human and approachable.
it totally did.
Yeah.
And it set the tone for this culture of collaboration and continuous learning. What I found most helpful is that the podcast really emphasized seeking out multiple sources of support.
Yeah, they talked about finding both a mentor and a leadership coach.
Right.
And I was wondering, why the distinction? Why both?
Well, they explained that a mentor, someone with more experience in your field, can offer guidance based on their own journey. Think of them as your experienced Sherpa, helping you avoid those common pitfalls and pointing out shortcuts along the way. But then a coach is more like your personal trainer.
Oh, okay.
They help you develop specific leadership skills, address any blind spots you might have, and push you beyond your comfort zone. They even mention this really thought-provoking question that a good coach might ask. What's one thing you're avoiding right now that could actually help you grow as a leader?
Oh, that's a tough one. But probably a question we all need to ask ourselves from time to time. Because it's so easy to just get caught up in the day-to-day and avoid those things that feel uncomfortable, even if they're ultimately good for us, right?
That's so true.
Mm-hmm.
And on that note, the podcast guests also highlighted the importance of actually having a personal development plan. Not just some vague idea of what you want to achieve, but like a concrete roadmap for your leadership journey.
I remember that they were really specific about what to include, right? Like different types of goals.
Exactly. They talked about setting goals related to your technical skills, your leadership competencies, and even your personal well-being.
Hmm.
It's recognizing that you can't pour from an empty cup.
It's about developing yourself as a whole person, not just as a leader.
Yes.
And they also emphasize the importance of regularly reviewing and adjusting that plan.
Absolutely. It's a living document, not something you create once and then forget about. They even suggested scheduling specific times in your calendar, like blocking off time, to actually reflect on your progress, identify areas where you need to adjust, and celebrate your wins along the way.
Oh, I love that idea. It's so easy to let those wins just kind of pass by without really acknowledging them. But celebrating those small victories can really help to keep you motivated and build momentum.
It totally does.
This is all giving me a lot to think about. I feel like I'm already starting to feel a little bit more equipped to handle the challenges of a new leadership role.
Well, that's great to hear. But we've honestly just scratched the surface of what the unfolding leader has to offer.
I know, right? There's so much more to explore. You know what? It really feels like we are getting this incredible personal mentorship session by doing this deep dive into the Unfolding Leader podcast. We've covered so much already: leadership styles, building credibility, embracing that learning curve, creating a development plan.
Right. And it can feel like a lot.
It is, but each piece kind of builds upon the other, right?
It does. Yeah. And that actually brings us to another really important takeaway from the podcast, which is all about empowering your team. They really emphasize this idea that true leadership is not about control. It's about enabling others to succeed.
So less my way or the highway and more let's figure this out together kind of approach.
Exactly. The podcast host actually used this really cool phrase. He said it's about shifting from a conductor to a gardener.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, conductor, dictates every single note.
Right.
But a gardener cultivates an environment where the plants can thrive.
I love that analogy. I think it really paints this clear picture of what it means to empower a team. But how do you actually go about creating that kind of environment? Where do you even begin?
Well, the podcast had some, really practical strategies. And one that really stood out to me was this emphasis on effective delegation. It's not just about dumping tasks on people. It's about thoughtfully assigning responsibilities that align with people's strengths and provide opportunities for growth.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where you're not just throwing work at people, but you're giving them challenges that will help them develop and grow.
Exactly. Yeah. And that helps to build trust and a sense of ownership within the team.
Because I can see how if someone feels like they are just following orders all the time, they're not really going to be as invested. But if they feel like they're contributing in a meaningful way, that's going to make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And this is where, clear and consistent communication is just so crucial. You need to make sure that everyone understands the goals, the expectations, and how their individual contributions fit into the big picture.
It's almost like you're saying, like making sure that everyone has a copy of the same map so they know where they're going and why.
Yes, exactly.
But then, what happens when there's like a detour or an obstacle along the way? How do you handle those unexpected challenges as a team?
Yeah, that's where fostering collaboration becomes so important.
Mhm.
The podcast hosts, they really stress the importance of creating a space where people feel comfortable sharing ideas, brainstorming solutions, and working together to kind of overcome those challenges.
They even suggested having like regular team retrospectives, right?
Yeah.
Where everyone can kind of step back and reflect on what went well, what could be improved, and how to approach things differently in the future.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not just about, focusing on the problems or dwelling on what went wrong. It's equally important to celebrate those successes.
Oh, yeah.
Recognizing and appreciating those individual and team accomplishments, that's essential for building morale and reinforcing those positive behaviors.
I can see how that would really motivate people, to see that their hard work is being acknowledged and appreciated. And it shows that you, as a leader, are genuinely invested in their success.
Exactly. But you know what? I think one of the most powerful takeaways from the unfolding leader that we haven't touched on yet was this emphasis on creating a feedback culture.
Oh, yeah, they talked about that a lot, didn't they?
Yeah, and they were very clear that it's not just about giving feedback, it's about cultivating an environment where feedback is seen as this gift, both for the giver and the receiver.
Right.
It has to be like a safe space where people feel comfortable sharing their perspectives,
Yeah.
both positive and constructive, without fear of judgment or reprisal.
Because if people are afraid to speak up, you're missing out on valuable insights and opportunities to improve. Oh.
Exactly. And they even gave this really compelling example of a company that completely transformed its culture by implementing a 360-degree feedback system. It wasn't easy at first. People were really hesitant to give honest feedback, especially to their superiors. But the leadership team modeled this vulnerability by openly receiving feedback and demonstrating this commitment to continuous improvement. And it totally changed the game for them.
So it's about like leading by example and showing that you're open to feedback yourself and that you value those diverse perspectives. I'm starting to see how a lot of these leadership principles, they're all interconnected. It's not enough to just focus on one area and neglect the others. It's about developing this more holistic approach.
You're so right. It's like weaving a tapestry. Each thread, each principle contributes to the overall strength and beauty of the final piece. And just like weaving a tapestry takes time and patience, so does developing as a leader.
And the podcast, I remember they really emphasized that leadership is a journey, not a destination, right? They really encourage listeners to embrace the challenges, learn from their experiences, and constantly strive to grow.
And one of the most valuable tools on that journey is self-awareness.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, they talked about the importance of really taking that time to reflect on your strengths, your weaknesses, your values, and how your actions impact others.
They even suggested keeping a leadership journal, didn't they?
Yeah.
Like to capture those aha moments, to track your progress, and identify those areas where you need to stretch yourself.
Exactly. This is like having a conversation with yourself, a way to process your experiences and make more intentional choices as a leader.
This has been so insightful. It feels like they have given us this roadmap for not just surviving, but like truly thriving in a leadership role.
I think so too.
But it's not just about following a set of rules or formulas, right?
No, absolutely not. It's about bringing your authentic self to the role, leveraging your unique strengths, and continuously learning and evolving.
And remembering that you don't have to have all the answers right away. It's okay to ask for help, to seek guidance from those mentors and coaches, and lean on your team for support.
Absolutely. Leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being present, being engaged, and being committed to making a positive impact.
It's amazing how much The Unfolding Leader managed to pack into just one episode. We really have gone from feeling like we're at the base of this huge leadership mountain to having a path forward and like the essential tools to start climbing.
That's the power of a good deep dive like this.
Right. Like that idea of keeping a leadership journal, that really stuck with me.
It's a great practice.
I'm already thinking about what I would write for my first entry. But for our listener, someone just starting out in their first leadership role, I think the biggest takeaway is that it's okay to not have all the answers right away.
I completely agree. And the unfolding leader actually addressed this head on. They talked about how common it is for new leaders to experience that fear of failure.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when you're surrounded by people who seem to have it all figured out, it can be really paralyzing.
And they even gave it a name, right? It was something like imposter syndrome?
Yes, imposter syndrome, that nagging feeling that you're not good enough, that you're going to be exposed as a fraud.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well.
But what's so interesting is that the podcast guests actually reframed this fear. They suggested that feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome can actually be a positive thing.
Really? How
Right.
so? I would think it would make you less likely to take risks or try new things.
Well, they explained that it can actually be a sign that you're pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone. You're challenging yourself to grow.
Oh, okay.
And that's really where the learning and development happen.
That's a much better way to look at it. So instead of seeing imposter syndrome as this weakness, you can embrace it as a sign that you're on the right track, that you're moving forward.
Exactly. But how do you move past that fear and actually take action?
Yeah, good question.
Well, the unfolding leader offered a couple of pieces of advice. One was to focus on your strengths. Remind yourself of what you bring to the table, the skills and experiences that make you a valuable leader.
So build that inner confidence.
Yes, exactly. And they also talked about the importance of building a supportive network around yourself. Find those mentors, coaches, peers who can offer encouragement, guidance, and maybe a fresh perspective when you need it most.
It's like having your own personal cheering section, there to support you every step of the way.
Exactly.
But, I think the most important message from the unfolding leader and the best advice we can give to our listener today is that leadership is a privilege.
It truly is. It's an opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of others, to inspire, to empower, and to create something truly meaningful.
And while it can be challenging, demanding, maybe even a bit overwhelming at times, it's also incredibly rewarding.
Remember, you're not alone on this journey. Embrace those challenges, celebrate the wins, and never stop striving to be the best leader you can be.
You've got this. We can't wait to see all the amazing things you accomplish.